We are delighted, of course, to be joined by United States Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey, ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Now, Congressman Menendez, yes, Congressman Menendez, then chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, delivered the keynote address at our first luncheon convened in 2004 at Boston, with over 500 guests attending. Bob was presented the Eagle Leadership Award by the Latino Leaders Network later in 2006, this time as a new member of the United States Senate. There is no stronger advocate for our community than Bob. We are grateful for his leadership. Please welcome Senator Bob Menendez, who has agreed to introduce our honoree.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Mickey. La introducción fue como te la escribí, así que te lo agradezco. No, eso es mentira, no. Le agradezco la introducción y está un placer estar aquí de nuevo con los líderes latinos a nivel nacional y sobre todo para reconocer al Reverendo Cortés. For those of you who are terrorized, I might continue in Spanish for the next few minutes. Let me, that should be a minority in this group, but nonetheless, let me say I appreciate Mickey's invitation and his leadership in bringing us together for quite some time now, and the Latino Leaders Network Board of Directors as corporate sponsors for all you do to amplify the voices of Latin Americans in politics and business and in our economy. To Senator Rio Santiago, I appreciate your message. I embrace it. And regardless of our political persuasion, the one thing that is true, when we do not get engaged and come out and vote, we let others decide our futures for us. And I prefer that we decide our future for ourselves than others decide our future for us. So thank you very much for your message. It's a pleasure to be here with the Latino Leaders Network. I remember back in 2004, 14 years ago, when I was the keynote speaker at the very first luncheon, and it seemed like a different era back then for our community. And yet, if there was ever a time for Latino leadership in our politics, now is the time. We come together at a time when the voices, the hopes, and the dreams of America's Latino families have been disregarded, and at sometimes even disparaged. Some in our communities have seen their families separated on our southern border, while others live in fear inside their homes, wondering who's knocking at the door. Our dreamers wonder every day whether they will have to leave their schools or lose their jobs because the American dream, the only dream they've ever known, has been denied to them. We still have brothers and sisters living in the dark in Puerto Rico because our emergency disaster response was far less effective compared to Florida and Texas. These 3.5 million United States citizens who just happened to call Puerto Rico home deserve the dignity of any other American in this country. Meanwhile, there's an effort to undercut our communities in the 2020 census, which will deny our cities and our county the resources they need for education, healthcare, and infrastructure at the very core of where the large part of our community is located. And we have seen healthcare policies that disproportionately limit access in communities of color, and tax policies that enrich the wealthy few at the expense of the struggling many. So no matter where you stand politically, decency is bipartisanship. And nowadays, it's in short stock. In spite of all these challenges, when I look around this room, I'm reminded that our future is bright. Latinos are starting businesses at 3 times the rate of the general population. We create millions of jobs and generate billions in revenue. Latina entrepreneurs are key drivers of this success, accounting for nearly half of those new businesses in just the past 10 years. Together, we have $1.7 trillion in buying power today. Our children have some of the biggest gains in high school completion. And by 2023, only 5 short years from now, 1/3 of all of the nation's school children will have Latino ancestry, which means 1/3 of the nation's competitive future will depend upon this community. El futuro, el éxito de nuestra nación empieza en el barrio. So today, 57 million Latinos and Latinas across America, 3.5 million living in our territories are hardworking parents, students, and innovators. We are Cuban and Colombian, Puerto Rican and Mexican, and so much more. Yet our diverse roots do not divide us, they unite us. Everywhere I go, I see that our families share a sense of boundless optimism. Our values, hard work and responsibility, faith and family, compassion and community are American values. That's why today I have the honor of introducing to you someone who has embodied those values for decades. Driven by the biblical mandate to serve the least of these, as Matthew 25:40 says, Reverend Luis Cortés Jr. is the founder, president, and CEO of Esperanza, the nation's premier Hispanic faith-based evangelical network. Under his leadership, Esperanza has grown from a 20-person operation to one with over 300 employees and a $35 million budget. But more importantly, it boasts a national network of more than 13,000 Hispanic faith and community-based organizations across our nation. What makes Reverend Cortés's achievement all the more impressive is like so many of us, he came from humble roots. He grew up in Spanish Harlem, graduated with honors from City College, earned a master's degree from Union Theological Seminary and Southern New Hampshire University before launching a career dedicated to serving others. Today, national and international leaders alike see the advice and input of Reverend Cortés on just about every policy issue, from workforce development to affordable housing to immigration to education to empowerment. And many of us have been moved when we saw Reverend Cortés deliver the invocation prayer at President Obama's 2013 inaugural luncheon. I've seen firsthand the difference that Reverend Cortés has made through Esperanza's work since 2001, organizing the National Hispanic Prayer Breakfast and Conference. And more recently, the Urban Institute named Esperanza one of 24 partners in a new Gates Foundation-funded initiative, the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty. Here, the Reverend continues to be a voice for policies that promote the successes of Hispanic families. From his efforts advancing economic justice, to his support for the arts, to his role as a moral leader, Reverend Cortés is both a man of faith and an agent of action and change. Ladies and gentlemen, the Latino Leadership Network is proud to present this year's Eagle Award to the Reverend Luis Cortés Jr.
Wow. I'm so happy the senator read it just like I wrote it. Wow. This group looks so prosperous. I'm a Baptist minister. We should collect an offering right away. We just should. To Mickey Vara, who told me I have 20 minutes. I'm a Puerto Rican Baptist. 20 minutes is the intro, but nevertheless, I will keep to that. I will not do that. I will keep to the tradition that Mickey has established with Latino leaders. To Mickey Vara, the board of directors, the event team, the staff, and the sponsors, I'm humbled. My family is humbled. Our organization is humbled, and so we give you thanks. I do have a message from Julio Suarez, who said, please drink the beers, because if you don't, he has to drink them. And there's an awful lot of it out here, so. It's difficult to prepare for this meeting. I read the book. I know many of the people who are in the book. And when I started thinking about what do you say to Latino leaders and how do you speak about the same issues or struggles, as a clergy person, how can I be different? And the answer is I can't. We face struggles in this country, and we always have. though the first language spoken in this country when Cristobal Colón arrived here, a citizen of Spain, he was Italian, but a citizen of Spain. And the first language spoken, first foreign language spoken on these shores was Spanish. So how do we recapture our history? Because I think that's a major issue. As our children are attacked directly and indirectly psychologically with the dialogue that we're having at a national level, I think there's nothing more important than us recapturing our history. Who were, in fact, our first senators, our first congressmen? Who were, in fact, the business leaders of our nation? This book, Latino Leaders, talks about some of that, but it's too recent. We go back to Cristobal Colón. We need to recapture our history. We need to let our children know, not only do we belong here, we were here first as strangers. We were here first as strangers because the indigenous people of this nation were saying, like, who is this guy Colón? When I looked and read through the book, Mickey, I realized there's 4 different types of struggle. You have our class and economic struggles. We have our, what I call our culture and Latino-ness or Hispanicness struggles. You have struggles in the book about network and access. And then when we get to a certain point, we actually have struggles about policy and power. I don't have enough time, so I just chose one. And I chose culture and Hispanicness because I think all of us go through that particular struggle. As a child, I didn't know we were poor. I was born in Spanish Harlem, in El Barrio, as we called it. I didn't know that my father worked a low-skilled job. I did not know that selling Popular Club Plan and my mother selling furniture and clothes out of the Popular Club Plan and the Spiegel catalog. I don't know if some of you remember. You got to be kind of older to remember that. But my mother sold that so she could stay home with the children, me and my 2 brothers, and still support the family. I didn't know that speaking in Spanish at home with abuela and abuelo and your parents and understanding that that television world wasn't real, I didn't know that. So I learned English watching television, basically what we called muñequitos, right? Like many of us. But I didn't know. And I always remember I was overjoyed as a child my first day of school. I had a bulto with my paper and my pencils. And I remember in my first day of school, I met 2 kids, Larry and Gilbert. I don't remember their last names, but to this day, I'll never forget them. They were the first gringos I ever met. Larry and Gilbert. And I wanted to be their friend. I don't know why, but I wanted to be. It was like, those are like the TV guys, right? And my first day of school, back then, school ended, public school, PS 83 in El Barrio, ended at lunch ended in midday. You would have a lunch, and then you go. And I was walking out, and I saw Larry and Gilbert waiting for me. I was excited. And I walked out, and before I could say a word, Larry and Gilbert spit in my face. And they called me something which I did not understand. They called me a spick. I didn't know what that was. But I remember it probably isn't good. And even as I say it today, I kind of feel the tension in my tummy, my stomach, because that happened. And I remember going home, and I remember my mother saying to me, ay, mijito, no te apures, eso no es nada. Like, ignore it. We don't want any problems. 5 years later, in 1967, my father and my mother got assigned to public housing. And in my father's mind, moving from Spanish Harlem to Black Harlem in 1967 was a good idea. By then, I looked like an Italian kid. And my first day of school, and this is what I'm going to talk about, right? Cultural clash. My first day of school, I'm walking in the hall with Anthony Tompkins, another name I will never forget. And he says to me, you better get ready. And I said, why? He said, Hack, a guy named Hack. Those of you who follow basketball know Hack was back in the days a guy who fouls a lot, but he was a young African-American male in the 8th grade. I'm in the 7th grade. and he was about 5'11". And I thought he had a beard, but he didn't. But it seemed that way to me. And Hack had called me a cracker. And I'm like, I don't know what a cracker is. But it's 1967. I look Italian. I'm at Frederick Douglass Junior High School. 2,800 young people, and there's 2 Puerto Ricans in that school. A young woman named Mary, who was as fine as could be for a young Latina, and this kid that looked Italian, Louis, as they call me. And I had the first of about a dozen fights in my first 3 months in that school. Now, I will say this about Hack, because there's nothing more oppressive than being told at 10 o'clock in the morning that you're going to get your butt kicked at 3. So you watch the clock go slow. And I did what any good Latino American would do. I jumped out of school like 2 minutes early and ran to the bus stop. And I get to the bus stop, and I swore I made it out. And I'm like, maybe tomorrow, it won't happen. And I'm looking this way, and the kids who were looking this way went, oh, that kind of sound came up, which meant Hack is behind me. I would love to tell you that I beat the heck out of Hack, but Hack beat the heck out of me my first day. 2 years later, I'm at DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx. First day of school. And I'm walking up the steps of DeWitt Clinton High School, and there's a group of Puerto Rican guys. Those are my guys, I'm thinking, as I'm walking up the stairs. And they looked at me and they laughed. And I can't say it the way they said it, but this is what they said. Ha! This guy thinks he's a Negro or black. I'm using nicer words. I was wearing Playboy shoes, sharkskin pants, an alpaca sweater, the official uniform of African American youth in 1969. I did not know that. The late 60s and 70s introduced me in Blank Harlem and in the Bronx to the ideas of the time. So I want to raise this because these ideas have a role to play for us today. The ideas back then was black power, brown power, self-determination. This is a big one. The social control of institutions. Who set the pace, right? Economic development by black, by brown. Latinos grow up in 2 very distinct cultures. At home, we were taught to look down when authority speaks to us. It's a sign of respect. In school, that's a sign of disrespect. Most of our children do not have the capacity to tell a teacher, you know, teacher, your problem is that you don't understand how we've been sociologically been brought up. And culturally, what you're asking me to do is in error. So what the kids do is what I did when I was screamed at in school. The more they screamed at me or told me to look at me in the eye, the lower I got, which led to mommy being called to school for me being disrespectful and for a confusion for a period. Too many of our young people still suffer that. Too many of our young people still don't understand that their culture is different. Our cultural differences are ingrained even in our language. And sometimes I'm really grateful of that. Because if I'm thinking in Spanish and the airplane I'm supposed to be on flies overhead as I run to the airport, I get to say, el avión me dejó. For those of you who don't speak the heavenly language of Spanish, the airplane left me. When a plate falls and it breaks, el plato se cayó. The plate fell as if it had its own will. That fatalism comes as a mixture of indigenous culture, which we are and have, and Roman Catholicism. That mixture allows for an idea that can be abused to the detriment of our people. So I'll give you an example. It's that idea that Hollywood, when I was a child, and still does, allows that 3 bad gringos can go into a Mexican town and take it over. And all the Mexicans are dressed like in these white little pants, ponchos, and hats. And somehow and all of you have seen Clint Eastwood movies, so don't make believe you don't know what I'm talking about. Clint Eastwood became a zillionaire based on that, on perpetuating that image, that Mexican men and women are meek, and that the super gringo, Clint Eastwood, can come into town and free us from a few bad gringos. It is subjugation. It's false communication. It is inferiority through media. It happens in our school books. We have in our textbooks 2 pages in world history dedicated to Simón Bolívar. How could that be when a man creates 13 countries and liberates them from oppression, but he's not discussed? He doesn't really exist. He is a man that makes George Washington look puny in comparison. I use the word puny on purpose. Latinos' first struggle and our continuing struggle is the one of culture. If they could beat us at culture, early in our life, we are subjugated. We are psychologically subjugated to being second class. So conversations about borders, about criminality, that is the goal. To psychologically subjugate, not us, because we're already beyond it. It's our children. It's about the future, not about the present. And that's what we have to understand. We won't have the gumption to fight for or develop networks and access or build our economy or influence policy and power if subtly you have been subjugated psychologically. So it is about the future. A Latino child crying at the border for a parent instills anger in all of us. But you know what it instills in our children? Not anger, fear. Fear. Every Latino child's heart who's listening to the news, in their soul, regardless of their status, education, or social class, is being told directly, you have no future. This is our task. This is our primary fight, to protect our children, to fight for the future of our nation by not allowing the subjugation of our children psychologically. We must be vigilant of what we communicate to our children and what social media is communicating for them. For me, it is schools and church that help me create the social constructs needed to survive these cultural onslaughts, which are not new, because I mentioned they started with me as a child. It was during high school that I started going to a Protestant church in Spanish Harlem due to the fact that my mother kept complaining to my father, and my father told me, if your mother's happy, I'm happy. If your mother's not happy, I'm not happy, and then it's going to be really bad for you. So I start going to church on Sundays in order to keep my mother happy and keep my father from being bad for me. This decision changed my life for the better. The institutional Latino church in the neighborhood, right? Second Spanish Baptist Church on 102nd Street, a small church, 200 people maybe. It provided for me access to a caring community. It provided for me access to an encouragement to find my Latino culture. They're the ones that told me, you got to learn Spanish better. And I'm like, why I got to learn Spanish for? And they were like, because you have to preach the gospel. You have to understand. You have to talk to your cousins. You have to. They actually helped me. I would speak, you know, as we always put kids up in church to terrorize them. We put them in front of the church to sing in Spanish. But they're singing in Spanish. We put them in front of the church to say something in Spanish. And when I said something wrong, the older ladies of the church from the first row would correct me. I learned through them. They challenged me to seek better for myself and for my future. They trained me for leadership by making me do things in the church that I didn't want to do, but they were leadership things. And it created mentors for me, adults who were academically prepared to challenge the world and to become a role model. A baseline. They gave me a baseline of thought, of theology, which you could call, some of you might want to call an ideology. You could call it what you want, but it was a baseline, which I could work from as I matured. And as I matured, I could take it to different levels and begin to do a critical analysis of what was going on in my world. My mentors, the Reverend Santiago, Dr. Soto Fontanes with a PhD out of Columbia University, Dr. Jose Ortiz, Dr. Orlando Costas. You notice something? Male role models, all with PhDs. in the church. And they were able to reach out and mentor me. An institution which provided a pathway to further develop in my career. I worked for the American Baptist churches. I worked for a group called IFCO, the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization, whose head of it was a gentleman by the name of Julian Bond. I have had the opportunity to cross over and do a lot of work with African American communities. Our future will depend on it. Somehow we became the largest minority in America. It means nothing. It really means nothing. Somehow we've become the largest minority, but we are bifurcated because some of us are Mexicanos and some are Puerto Rican and some are Puerto Rican from here or Puerto Rican from there, and some of us are Mexicanos, but it depends what colonia you're from. I'm learning that. So we're pretty divided, even among our unity here as leaders. IFCO's taught me, at IFCO, we did projects on the self-determination of Puerto Rico, the National Anti-Klan Network, and we supported freedom for South Africa with Nelson Mandela. And it was there that I began to have a connection to the African American community that was different, which led to African American mentors. Union Theological Seminary gave me a base, theological base. Eastern Baptist let me teach, which I learned is not what I wanted to do for a living. The Philadelphia Baptist Association, I had 113 churches in Philadelphia under my care. And while I was there, it was interesting. I had Congressman Bill Gray, the Reverend Dr. Bill Gray, was under my care, which was a joke. This is a congressman. He had one of the largest churches in the city, and I'm all of 24 years old trying to call him to tell him we're supposed to get together and pray. Back then, it was during the fax age. He says, you know what, son? You know, when an African-American minister calls you son, you already know what's going on. He goes, you know what, son? Why don't you send me a fax about what we're supposed to pray about? So I did, and he actually met with me and helped me, as did Reverend Dr. Leon Sullivan from the Sullivan Principles, who eventually says to me, I want you on the board of a bank, and it helped open doors and change my life. It is church, like my parents, that provided an ethical and social understanding about family, the poor, and community service. It was at church where I scoped out the girl with the prettiest legs. She was the smartest of all of them. I was in high school. I didn't expect that response, but I was in high school. I want you to hear this. I was in high school. She was in college. So I had some work to do. I married Damaris Flores, and we are here, and we'll be celebrating our 41st wedding anniversary this month. My mentors, like my parents, all pushed education. They all pushed social justice. They all demanded I speak and write for and on behalf of the neighborhood. Added to the men I mentioned were Dr. Lucius Walker of IFCO, Dr. Carl Flemister, who was the first African-American to head up health education, what was used to be called health education and welfare. I talked about Leon Sullivan, who put me on the board of an African-American bank called United Bank of Philadelphia. They formed me, and I was able to become the founder of Esperanza. And we have developed a faith-based, community-based response to the needs of Latinos in Philadelphia. We've been described as a national model, but I used other Latino groups, and I saw what happened in the African-American community in order to build Esperanza. Telacu and Chicanos por la Causa. Telacu is in East Los Angeles in LA. Chicanos por la Causa in Arizona. I visited them early when I first started Esperanza. And the leadership of those two organizations never said they were too busy. They never said don't come. I flew across the country and met with the presidents of those groups, which at that time were 10, 15 million. They were the largest Latino organizations in the country. And they taught me how to do this work, and they inspired me to do this work. And both of these organizations were Mexicano organizations. We have got to find ways to bridge these gaps that we have among our people. The 32 years at Esperanza have helped us develop a 15-acre campus, a charter school, which is not always, which is the difficult thing in a city like Philadelphia, which is a fully democratic city. Charter schools are for Latinos, if they're run by the local community, are empowerment, self-determination, economic development. It is what makes us, it is the most empowering thing we could do. But there is a conflict there between political parties and power. And so that's a really tough place. And we got to find a way to bridge that gap, or Latino charter schools are going to be separated from their Latino leadership. We've developed a college, a theater for the arts, over 450 jobs serving the local community. Being in the faith has helped open doors to political leaders. We've had the opportunity to serve, I've had the opportunity to serve 3 presidents. President Clinton, as part of I founded the National Hispanic Religious Partnership for Community Health, which was a health response having to deal also with HIV/AIDS. With President Bush, I was able to do a prayer at his inauguration and worked with him on faith-based immigration and Hispanic affairs. And with President Obama, we did Hispanic affairs, immigration, and I led a delegation on his behalf, on behalf of the White House, to Guatemala and Honduras on children coming to the border. Esperanza organized the national, I'm coming to an end, I'm going to go over a minute, I think. I'm going to be pretty close. 2 minutes, I'm there. We organized the National Hispanic Prayer Breakfast, and as we've done every 2 years, we bring together over 500 of our clergy to advocate. This year we did over 150 visits to the Hill. And we had in one program, Mr. Schumer, Ms. Pelosi, Mr. Smith from the Carolinas, who's Republican if you don't know him, the chair of the RNC, the vice chair of the DNC, and the vice president of the United States. It is a bipartisan program. I don't understand how people say we got to have bipartisan approaches and then we won't talk to each other. That's just not going to work. Clergy went to the Hill on the separation of families, and I am proud that we had over 180 visits where, regardless of the politician, we made it clear that separation of families is not allowed. There's a lot of noise in our current national debates on Hispanics and borders and us being criminals. We need to protect our children from psychological harm, teach our youth the tactics that were taught to us in the 60s and 70s that led to almost every Latino leader in this book. I want to end with a quote from a very famous person. I'm a Star Trek fan, and there's a group called the Borg, which go around and take over other groups. My friends, all the noise, all the rhetoric, all the attempts to stop Latino American culture from growing and becoming more powerful are irrelevant. You know why? The demographics are clear. And as the Borg say, resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. Thank you.
Reverend Cortés, on behalf of the Latino Leaders Network, it is my honor to present you with our Eagle Leadership Award for your contribution to our community and to our country. Congratulations.
Thank you.